Welcome in, Karen. Just waiting for a few more people to jump on, and then we will kick off with some introductions. Welcome, Tori. Welcome, Harry. Give it a couple more minutes, guys, just to see if we get a few more people jump in, and then we'll kick into it. Conscious we've only got a 30-minute session today, so we don't want to wait around too long, but just give it maybe one more minute and then we can start off. All right, Kevin. We might just kick in and do some introductions and things to get started, guys. Conscious we do have a relatively short session today, so as people trickle in, we'll kind of just carry on the conversation. But thank you for jumping on the call today, everybody. I've got Kevin with me here today from Annecto, who's going to be helping me out with the conversation. Kevin, I'll let you do a full introduction to yourself in just a minute, but just quickly before we do that, I'd just like to lead off with a couple of housekeeping things. For anyone in the session, please, we want this session to be as interactive as possible, so feel free to ask questions throughout. We will leave 5 or so minutes at the end just for Q&A as well, but if you can pop any questions that come to mind in the chat function that you see at the bottom of the Zoom panel, that would be fantastic. And then Kevin and I will help with answering those towards the end. But as a quick introduction, my name's John. I lead our customer success team here at Wheel, and I've got Kevin, who's the accounts manager at Annecto, a leading aged care and disability support provider, with me. Kevin, I might throw to you. If you can give a bit of an overview of Annecto and your role there, that would be an awesome place to start.
Yeah, thanks, John. Kevin Kirkpatrick, I'm the accounts manager at Annecto. So my role here has a responsibility over the accounts receivable and accounts payable function for the business. I've been here for a bit over 3 years now, and Annecto is an organisation. We are across the eastern seaboard, so Victoria through New South Wales, Queensland, and we provide supports to the aged care sector from an at-home, in-home supports perspective, and disability supports as well. So in-home, we've got some centre-based activities, and we also provide supports to independent living services as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Kevin. And yeah, I know we're having a bit of a chat before, and you've been with Annecto for about three and a half years now, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, something like that now,
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, with that, we might start to dive in a little bit here, but today we're going to explore, I guess, how effective spend management can transform your organization's financial health and operational efficiency. We're looking at how finance teams can impact the company culture and actually help drive smarter spending and accountability within your teams as well. And Kevin, I know that Annecto's a Wheel user, and you've probably experienced some of that, which we'll definitely dive a little bit deeper into with some of these questions. But I'd love to hear, I guess, look, Kevin, Annecto's got 1,100 employees, give or take. Can you walk us through, prior to Wheel, how you previously managed employee spending and reimbursements, any day-to-day challenges you were having, and I guess what the solution was at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, pre-Wheel, it's kind of chalk and cheese in terms of the experience and the activity. So we, from an on-demand payment perspective, so things you pay for by credit card, employee spend or petty cash, that's essentially what we did. We had around 30 odd corporate cards, and they mainly sat with our senior leadership and executives. So having the ability to use a card for that kind of on-demand purchase, there were some admins that had, but it wasn't broadly across the business. A large percentage of what we did was through petty cash floats that were kept in our regional and operational units, and also staff spend, which was then done through reimbursements. And kind of clunky, not ideal to be having people pay out of their own pocket as well, but also because of just a growth perspective as an organisation. We've grown really rapidly over the last 5 or 6 years. the ability to turn those processes around from approvals in a timely fashion, particularly talking about staff reimbursements, was challenged because it was very laborious, very paper driven. And sometimes you could be finding, 4 or 5 weeks before people were getting reimbursed for their out of pockets. So very clunky, not ideal, not particularly engaging as well. So it was a challenging time pre-wheel.
Yeah, yeah. And can it, like, just on that, Kevin, as well, like, obviously a bit of a clunky process, and you've mentioned kind of the rapid expansion of your team. Do you have a bit of an idea of how many employees were across your business when you first shifted over to Wheel?
Oh, I don't know exactly, but I've got a feeling that in the last 6 years, just ballpark, would probably double in size from an employee
Yeah,
perspective.
wow. Yeah, yeah. So definitely something that was worth addressing, I guess, at the time that you did.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, cool, cool. And I guess, like, Kevin, on that note as well, in terms of actually improving those processes for the reimbursements, and again, know you're using Wheel to help you out with that kind of expense management side of things, but can you talk through some of, I guess, the key strategies that were implemented to help improve the tracking of management and employee expenses? And I guess, like, how did you go about improving those clunky processes and actually making them better and more scalable?
Yeah, so we certainly questioned the need for the paper base, and one of the fantastic things about introducing Wheel, which made it really simple for us, was that we were able to upload our chart of accounts into the back end of the Wheel solution, but we were also able, depending on who the user was, to really customize what cost codes and things they use. So if it was a support worker who was supporting group activities to have a lunch on a Tuesday, then maybe they might see client cost as an expense code, they might see 1 or 2 others, but they wouldn't see the whole gamut of the chart of accounts. From a paper-based process, when stuff arrived into us, maybe had a code in there, maybe it didn't. Perhaps the code was the right code, perhaps it wasn't. And certainly even from a corporate cards perspective, the majority of what we saw from the spending was geared around travel. So if we didn't get those statements and receipts back in a timely fashion, we might cost it to travel or something similar, and then have to do a post-entry correction if we had that information come through. So there's a lot of rework, a lot of challenge to the accuracy, whereas now we can see it in real time, we can see it linked directly to what our chart of accounts and our cost codes are. We can have the budgets built specifically to a cost center or a particular stream of activity. We can get it down to that kind of very intimate level, which is great, and it gets us processing things more accurately and certainly more quickly.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Taking a bit of the guesswork out from the finance team and trying to save them a little bit of time there, I guess, as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, cool, cool. Yeah, awesome to hear, Kevin. And yeah, it's definitely something that we here at Wheel hear quite a bit in terms of the paper-based tracking and receipts and things like that. It's definitely a laborious manual task for a lot of finance teams, I think, to actually go through those transactions and accurately code them and get the information they need. So good to hear that you've come up with a solution that's working for you. But next thing I'd like to just kind of dive into here, Kevin, as well, is how do you set and enforce spend controls to prevent out of policy expenses? And I guess to tie this in with your previous process, obviously reimbursements can be a little bit more of a touchy subject. So spend policy is really, really important to make sure that your employees are spending on the right thing, but also, I guess, yeah, showing the right behaviors there as well. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a really interesting question we had as we were starting to deploy, because previously, as I say, we would use reimbursements, or we use petty cash, and there was an element of control people felt they had, team leaders and managers felt they had, because they could see the expenses that came in. And we just kind of sat down with them and said, look, there's this approval process in Wheel. So as soon as someone does a spend and they complete the transaction, it flows through to you as their line manager for an approval. So you get to review that and approve it as you would anyway. And if I think of one of the really nice ways we use that, we've got, I mentioned earlier, group activities. So we've got activities that might happen, say, every Tuesday. There's a group of aged clients that go out for lunch, and we have support workers hosting that. Previously, they might have paid from petty cash or some other way. Now they're using a Wheel card. So that receipt gets attached. And I said to the team leader, what do you normally do to manage that? They said, oh, well, we sit down at the end of the week and we review the receipts and we get the spreadsheet and we update it, and everything's great. And I said, well, you can do that at Wheel exactly the same way. You can sit down every week. And they're like, oh. And so so there was that piece from a visualization of how we see it. You see exactly the same information and deal with it the same way. But the other thing we've done as well is we've made sure that when we set people up with cards, so everyone that previously had a corporate card, they've already signed our card policy. Any new people that we've never had a corporate card with before, we've checked our card policy, we've checked our purchasing policy, made sure that they're fit for purpose, and we deliver those out to any new card holder and say, right, have a read of the purchasing policy. There's an expectation you understand that. Have a read of the card policy, sign up as accepting those terms and agreements. And now what we're looking to implement, and we have been doing in a kind of ad hoc fashion, but make more kind of structured, is a review from let's check if it's a client purchase, are we recouping those costs? If it's a general expense, is it a legitimate expense, does it fall in line? But we're also expecting those line managers who have signed up to that to be doing that anyway, because that's part of our standard purchase policy and our expectations just generally across the business, regardless of what the payment method is. So we would expect them to still adhere to that.
Yeah. Awesome. And I guess, like, to add to that, have you noticed much of an improvement in terms of, I guess, appropriate spending and spending within the expense policy since implementing a solution like Wheel, or has it remained about the same? What does that look like in terms of?
Look, it's a really good question. It's hard to say that we had the visibility to know previously, because depending who's getting the receipt, who's signing off, you're trusting that the line manager signing it off is signing off appropriate stuff anyway. We certainly have had stuff that we've questioned. So when we talk about our supported independent living clients, they might require a piece of furniture, a new bed or a new sofa, and you suddenly see a mattress purchase on a Wheel card. You might say, hang on a sec, what's that purchase? And I have had the accounting team come to me and say, is this a real expense for the business? And you say, well, hang on, what division does that sit in? It sits in this. It kind of makes sense, but we can go and ask the question. So those things kind of pop out as anomalies that we can question. But what I will say is that the really cool thing, and I've actually had people in the business come and be very complimentary of this in Wheel, is that particularly with our card expenditure, but sometimes with our other receipts as well, receipts would go missing, and you'd be asking people to maybe sign a stat deck or do something to evidence it. The fact that with Wheel, you've got the app on your phone, you can take the receipt at point of purchase and upload it. It means we're getting a lot more compliance to that. So people are typically within 5 days, a couple of weeks, within a fortnight period at worst, making sure all those receipts are loaded and the expense are completed. So we're getting a lot more compliance to that. And one of the things that I think has helped that, little takeaway for anyone who's looking to implement themselves, is as part of our deployment, we set people up with a card, they do their first purchase. Because we can see that in real time, we give them a call and say, hey, you've done your first purchase. How did you find it? Have you done the expensing yet? Do you want us to step you through it? And there was an element of, oh, Big Brother can see what I'm doing in real time. So it's also aided the compliance process.
Yeah, cool. And I guess that is, it's definitely kind of just that visibility for your finance team as well, right? Where previously lacking, now you've got kind of full control and to see what people are actually spending on in real time, and understanding that. I guess like on that point of Big Brother is watching, and I guess from the transparency point for the finance team about what your team members are spending on, can you provide some examples there from your team and your finance department in terms of how has the transparency improved trust and morale within the company? Have you noticed much of an impact on your team since implementing a solution like Wheel? What's that kind of done for morale amongst your team?
Yeah, look, certainly from a transparency perspective, I think, because we see things in real time. So at the end of the month, as I say, the chart of accounts and everything is already there. So we just pull a CSV file out and we do a review. We go, does this journal look like it makes sense? What sticks out? So we can have conversations straight away because the allocations are already done. We don't have to wait 2 weeks after the month end for a statement to arrive, and hopefully someone sends that back in a timely fashion so we can do allocations. So we can have those open conversations really quickly and easily, and we talk about is it an appropriate purchase, but also is it allocated correctly? And we can do that education piece. So it's created a better engagement with the finance team in understanding how we apply these transactions. But from a morale perspective and an engagement perspective, what I would say is that because previously pre-Wheel, as I say, we had about 30 corporate cards. We've probably got about 100 Wheel cards out in the business now because we've been able to, because it's not a credit card, we've been able to extend it down to a lower level because it's a debit card. And so people are now not being required to do a staff payment into a staff reimbursement. So from a trust and engagement perspective, that's certainly had a positive uplift in the business. And as a finance project and a finance person, one of the things that I really enjoy is we're now 12, 18 months down from deploying Wheel and the first few cards. I was out having lunch with a GM the other week, and they said to me, Wheel's one of the best initiatives we've ever done, just because of the engagement and the benefit it delivers from an operational perspective out in the coal face when people are delivering the support. So yeah, from that perspective, from a trust and an engagement and an enjoyment and use of the tool, it's been really satisfying across the business.
Yeah, awesome to hear. Awesome to hear. And Kevin, I know before the webinar actually started, we were having a bit of a chat about this in terms of how having an actual corporate card as opposed to reimbursing staff can actually impact team members, particularly if they're left out of pocket for long periods of time. Have you noticed much of an improvement in that sense from your team members? Has there been much feedback around that kind of side of things as well?
Yeah, we were certainly talking about how there's a reduction in the number of reimbursement requests we get, but also from a time perspective, as I say, it was a very paper-driven process before. So if I did a purchase today, maybe I got back to the office, completed a paper form, maybe I managed to catch my boss this week and get them to sign it off. It gets sent through to AP through the mail and or whatever, and it might be 2 weeks before it's processed. It might be 3 or 4 weeks before it hits a pay run. So I'm out of pocket that money. The fact that, as I say, we now have put wheel cards in people's hands, number one, they're avoiding having to do those expenses more often than not, which is good. But also because we've diminished the number of reimbursements we're doing, they're kind of getting through a process a lot quicker. And some of that's by virtue of having wheel, but also some of that's by virtue of our other processes as well. But definitely we've seen a reduction in the requirement and therefore a speed in the turnaround.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. And in terms of, I guess, like just kind of speaking to like how team members have found it in that sense as well, have you found most team members have, I guess, like found using the product quite easy? Are they receptive to, I guess, the tech change rather than doing things a bit more of an old-fashioned way? What does that look like within Annecto from, I guess, a user perspective?
Yeah, great question. And it's been a really interesting piece. So from our perspective, the use of has been really well accepted and adopted. In fact, people find it super easy to use and really quite intuitive and very simple. Our biggest challenge, to be honest with you, has been during our deployment. We've sat down with people and said, okay, so you need to go to Google Play and download this app. And they say, what's Google Play? And you need to add the card to your wallet and go, what's your wallet? So the education around a tech perspective has more been around that. As soon as we get it into the wallet and do a purchase, and as I say, we've been calling people up as soon as we notice their first purchase and go, how was that transaction? How did you find it? And let's step you through it. And they go, is that all there is? It's really simple. Yeah, so the actual use of the tool, once it's loaded up onto their devices, it's super easy to use and people are just like, wow, that's really simple. So yeah, the user experience has been great.
Yeah, and I think change management's always an interesting point around implementing a new piece of tech, regardless of what it is anyway, right? The education piece. So yeah, it's good to hear that your users don't find it overly difficult once they're up and running, but definitely a challenge getting your head around a new piece of tech. So
yeah. And the other piece I might just throw in there, just from a use perspective, and it's not even the use of the technology, it's just more the concept of how you might use the card. So I think traditionally we're all used to a card being you get a physical card and that's your limit, that's your spend, you have to do it. With Wheel, one of the things we've been able to do across our business, which has been really interesting and really useful, is we might say, okay, this particular group, you have a combined spend, so you have a limit of $1,000, but you have 5 cards that point to that $5,000. That's your collective spend. And so, getting people to understand that I have a card, but it's part of a conjoined limit. And thinking of the budget from that perspective has been probably one of the more difficult things that we've had to do from a change management perspective. But once people get the grasp of it, it works really well.
And I like just to kind of build on that a little bit, Kevin, as well, from the change management perspective, how did Annecto go about, I guess, educating employees on the new tech that you're implementing, and how was that received? Was there a big company-wide session? Are you running any kind of like intranet pages? What does that look like in terms of your change management process?
Yeah, so no, it was a lot of very personalised hand holding and stuff. So what we did initially, so originally our plan was to replace all of the existing corporate cards. So we broke them into the regional groups, and we might do somewhere between 4 and 8 people at a time, and we do that particular region. We'd have them all, particularly if we couldn't get to their location, we'd have them all on a web meet like this, or if we could, we get out to the office and have everyone sitting in a room, and we do it all at the same time. We talk about the concept of what it is. It's a debit card payment system. It's just virtual rather than physical. The way you purchase is exactly the same. You tap and go, or you purchase online. And so when we made the concept of it still being a card, people went, okay, that part I get. how do I use it on my phone was the next question. And then, as I say, you might talk about how you use a wallet or those sort of things. But once we kind of got them across that, like that was the easy part, and just doing a do tap and go. And like I say, some people are like, I've never tap and go anything, even with a physical card. What do I do? So it was that was interesting. But so the change management piece was relatively easy, and it was more around just getting people's heads around the setup, getting the device onto their phone, and the concept around a budget. But in terms of, oh, if I just go to a shop and I do this, yeah, okay, great.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common theme as we've come to learn about implementing a new piece of, I guess, finance tech, is not only the tech piece, but also some concepts about what it's actually doing to benefit the finance team as well, which is an interesting one to get across. But yeah, good to hear that it's not, I guess, too detrimental there in that sense. But look, Kevin, the last question that I'll ask you before we open it up to the room for any Q&A is, speaking in your own experience, can you give us some different ways that finance teams can contribute to a positive company culture, and I guess what that would look like for you?
Sorry, I think you've just dropped out there.
Can you hear me now, Kevin?
That's better. Sorry, I've got you now.
Okay, all good. Sorry about that.
Not sure what.
Cool. So last question that I was going to ask you just before we open up to Q&A was, speaking in your experience, can you give some different ways that finance teams can actually create a positive company culture, I guess? And so that can be whether it's ways of making the employees' lives easier. What does that look like within Annecto, and how have you kind of managed that on your side?
Yeah, so certainly through the AR and AP space in the last 3 years, what I've been keen to do and is break my team out into a business partnering perspective, because it's very important that we get the compliance right and the accountability right and all the allocations correct and all those sort of things. But our job is really to help facilitate the business do its business and perform its operations. So I've been really mindful in the last few years to make sure we're getting out having conversations with operational managers, with GMs, with their staff, and saying, what is the frustration? What's the bottleneck? What's the difficult point that you're doing? And maybe we know what the solution is, maybe we don't. And we can have a conversation how we get around it. One of the couple of interesting things when we were starting to deploy Wheel, if I bring it back to a Wheel conversation, we were doing our pilot with a handful of cards last year, and we were out in a particular regional office talking about it. And there was an individual who said, look, I've got a corporate card, but I'm going on 3.5 months long service leave. So can we get a corporate card for the person that's covering for me in the next 2 days? And it's like, no, we can't. And they were like, well, I'll just give them my card. I'm like, no, you're not even going to do that. I don't want to hear that's happening. But we can set up a Wheel card. We can set up your budget. We can have their card point into it. And when you come back from your leave, you can have access as well. This is what the solution will look like. And then while we were sitting there, we had a talk about group activities and how group activities might work. And we kind of, talked about the frustration of they'd either purchased a prepaid MasterCard, or they had petty cash, or this or that. It's like, look, that's, again, not quite the most appropriate solution from a finance point of view. Understand why you're doing it, because it makes the life easier. Why don't we set up this solution using a Wheel budget? We might have half a dozen support workers that have a card that access that budget, and you have views and controls. You can see who's spent what where. How does it? And so, again, we're listening to what their problem is and providing a solution that's got all the finance, compliance, and control aspects around it, but still delivers an outcome that allows them to do business as they've always done, or perhaps even a little bit better than they've done. I think that's the key part, is understanding what they're trying to achieve and then working out how we can support them to get to that end.
Yeah, awesome. Great answer. And I like what I take away from that. It's almost the surprise and delight factor, right? Where if you can make their life a little bit easier, and they're not necessarily expecting it, how awesome is that as someone that's working in the business, and having your process improved by the wonderful finance team.
Absolutely. And again, look, one of the great things about Wheel, because it's, we control the cash on it, it's our own funds and everything else. When we were having this conversation originally, they'd be like, okay, great. Well, what is it? 4 weeks till I get a card? It's like, actually, if you sign that form there, I can set you up in 5 minutes.
Mm.
So again, even deployment out to being able to use it's basically there. Is there anything this can't do? And no, we're here to solve these problems for you. So let's make it as robust and as simple and quick to set up and deploy as we can. And in this instance in particular, it's gone down really, a treat with the business. And as a finance person delivering finance projects, I've got people 12 months down the track still saying to me, it's one of the best initiatives we've done because it's still, making life supremely easy, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic. Kevin, we might go to some questions before we wrap up. There's just a couple here in the chat. So first question, Kevin, how did you build a business case for investing in Wheel? And do you have any advice for encouraging stakeholder buy-in across the business?
Yeah, I'm going to have to defer and say I'm not quite across the details of the business case. I think that had been done prior to me taking over the project to deployment, but I certainly know that there was some analysis around the banking costs versus their own costs, and that played into it. But also, I think we had a lot of conversation around not just the financial benefits from that business case, but also the other engagement and further reaching benefits in terms of removing the risks around staff reimbursements and other expenses.
Yeah, cool. Next question from Tori. Do you have any tips on educating and encouraging employees to complete expense reports?
Do you know what? The simplest thing with Wheel was that they could do it in real time. I've had senior managers come and hug me in the office when I've seen them because they were forever losing receipts or having to store them away. And they say to me with much delight, I do my purchase, I sit there and take a photo of my receipt, put the couple of pieces of information I need to because we've got that chart of accounts in the back of Wheel, and then it's done. And I don't have to worry about it or look at it ever again. And then with much delight, I throw the receipt in a bin. So that's probably the thing, is the ease to completing the expense report. Anything you make easy, people will do. And literally with Wheel, it pops up to do on your app like a couple of seconds after you've completed your purchase. So getting people to comply with that is really quite straightforward.
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? A lot of the people that kind of first sign up for an expense management tool often are a little skeptical about how it's going to be received by employees. But I think from the employee standpoint, it saves them having to be hassled by the finance team as well. So it's kind of working both ways in a sense there, isn't it?
Oh, and look, if I remember back in the day when I got my first corporate card and I was traveling a lot, I used to take an envelope with the dates of my itinerary on it. I had my boarding passes and my taxi receipts, and I'd wait for my bank statement to come and I'd try and match it all up. And hopefully all the expenses from that trip were actually on the one statement. But as I say, with Wheel, the beauty is that I go and do my purchase, I get my receipt at my point of sale, I take a photo, I can do it as I'm walking back to the office if it's been a coffee meeting or a lunch meeting, I can do it at the end of the day. And what we've typically noticed is that most people, when we've set them up, are generally completing their expenses within sort of 2 or 3 days of doing their purchases. Some are a little bit longer if they're doing a trip away or whatever, but generally that compliance is within a couple of days of doing the purchase itself, because it's so simple and it's, as I say, it's a couple of clicks and it's done.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing. Karen's put a question in the chat for Wheel team. Karen, I'll have somebody reach out to you via email after this call just to kind of address what the application process would look like and outline the fees and charges. More than happy to get someone from our team to reach out to you just to have a bit of a conversation around that. Conscious of time, Kevin, we might try and do one more quick question if that's okay with you, and then we'll wrap up here. But last question from Harrison: what has been the biggest challenge with getting users to complete expenses, and how has Wheel helped with this? So I guess that's kind of, we have kind of spoken about this, but is there any particular challenges that you've had with having employees submit expenses?
Look, historically, I think just from a timing perspective, and it's more around the corporate card piece, because there's that time delay between point of spend and getting your statement and doing your reconciliation. That's where you have the challenge, because people would lose receipts or forget where they put them or what have you, and then finding the time to sit down and do that reconciliation and allocation and send it all back so we can process. That's the biggest challenge we had, to be honest with you, because if you're then talking about petty cash flow, so you're talking about staff reimbursements, people are a lot better at doing that sort of stuff. So it's more the corporate card space where we had the biggest challenge. It's not the only challenge, but it's probably the most significant challenge. And as I say, just the ease of uploading a copy of receipt. You take a photo, do your allocation there, and then in the moment, it's a lot simpler. It's a lot easier, and we don't tend to have a compliance issue. In the last 12 or 18 months, there's probably, I don't know, half a dozen where we've had receipts lost, and most people are completing their expense allocations and acquittals within a few days of doing the purchase.
Yep, fantastic. Cool, Kevin, really appreciate your time. I think that's us. We're at 12:30 now. So thank you to everyone on the call that's attended. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to the Wheel team. We'll definitely be sending some follow-up information as well. But Kevin, really appreciate your time. Love your insights, and it's been awesome to have you along today. But yeah, anyone in the chat, feel free to reach out and we'll be in touch soon.